Shalom and welcome to the video for chapters 17 through 18. Let's enlarge the screen here and we'll get started. As you can see, the topic for the day concerns the reversing vav, and then we're also going to look at the participles. Here I put the topics in more explicit terms, the Hebrew reversing vav, and then we'll answer the question, how do the Hebrew pa'al participles look and function? So those are the two foci for today, and let's jump right into the reversing vav. Okay, let me begin with what we already know. We've learned that the perfect tense, kind of in quotations, or the suffix conjugation, is typically best translated with the English past tense. So shamarti, we have here I guarded, is how we would normally translate that verb. We've also learned that the imperfect tense, or the prefix conjugation, that is the conjugation that has prefixes always and sometimes suffixes, this is typically best translated with the English future tense. So we have eshmor, which we would normally translate as I will guard, from the root shamar, so as a first common singular, pa'al, imperfect. Now, what's this reversing vav all about? In short, the reversing vav is going to flip those rules on their heads. So here's the big rule that I'm going to reiterate over and over again throughout this lecture, and that we're going to cover all throughout the week. It's here in italics. When the reversing vav is used on a perfect verb, that is one like here, shamarti, the vav changes the tense of the verb into the future. So whereas we would normally translate it as a past tense English verb, this reversing vav that we're going to look at is going to flip that and change its meaning into more of a future tense kind of verb. Secondly, likewise, when the reversing vav is used on an imperfect tense verb, that is, or a prefix conjugation verb, the vav changes the tense of the verb into the perfect tense. So again, it flips its normal usage. Now that seems extremely confusing, and I know that there aren't any analogies that I can draw from in English, but I think this is so common within the Hebrew Bible that it's something we simply have to learn and train our minds to do and to recognize. So here's the reversing vav. Let's begin with perfect verbs. The first verb conjugation that we learned, the pa'al, perfect. So here we have a sentence, and remember, perfect verb plus reversing vav equals the future tense. That's going to be our starting point here. So let's look at the first sentence here. Shamru b'nei Yisrael et haTorah. Okay, so that's a pretty easy sentence, and it would say the Israelites, they guarded or they kept haTorah. So the children of Israel, as they do it here. Remember, b'nei can refer to not just to sons, but also to children and also to membership within a particular group. So this is an easy sentence. The verb here is third common plural, pa'al, perfect, shamru. Now what happens when we throw one of these reversing vavs onto the perfect? They've done it here. Let's look at the next sentence down. V'shamru b'nei Yisrael et haTorah. The sentence is exactly the same. All the words are the same. The only difference in this sentence is that there is this vav here, right at the beginning. And what it's doing is it's going to reverse the typical meaning of shamru, and it is going to put it, effectively turn it into a future tense verb, or it's going to make it so that its meaning is more like the imperfect. So v'shamru b'nei Yisrael et haTorah, the children of Israel, or the Israelites, will keep et haTorah, the Torah. They will keep it. They will guard it. So you can see there, very, very simple shift from the past tense to the future tense. Let's look at another sentence. Ahavta et ha'isha hazot. Okay. Again, we begin with a perfect tense verb. Ahavta, you loved. Second masculine singular. Pa'al, perfect. You loved this woman. So ha'isha hazot. There we have the demonstrative zot, feminine demonstrative zot, and functioning as an attributive demonstrative. So it's describing ha'isha. Notice that they both have the definite article ha. So that's why I say this woman. Now, we would translate this simply as you loved. Now, what happens if we stick that reversing vav on it? Ve'ahavta et ha'isha hazot. You shall love, and you shall love this woman. So it reverses the normal translation that we might give to it with the perfect. That vav does that to the verb. Let's look at the third sentence. Matzah David et hazahav. Matzah David et hazahav. Okay, so some pretty regular words. We recognize most of these. Matzah, of course, the third masculine singular. Pa'al, perfect, associated with the subject David. So David found matzah. This is a verb that we've recently had. But David found what? Et hazahav, the gold. Now, what happens if we throw that reversing vav on there? We have umatzah David et hazahav. Now, let's note one thing. The vav here is slightly different than the one you saw above. Right here, it's u. Above, we have ve. It's the same reversing vav. The only difference is that it has one of those, do you remember what they're called? The bump letters, beit mem pei. For the sake of pronunciation, it was easier to do u as opposed to the, so the u is there. The vav will, the normal vav, the ve with the vav plus the shava, will change to the oo sound before the letters beit, mem, and pei. And that's why you have it here. There's no change in terms of its function. It's still the reversing vav. Umatzah, and David will find the gold. Or David will find the gold. The and, as you can notice in some of these sentences, the and does not always have to go there. That kind of depends on the preference of the interpreter. Of the translator and her reading of the context. So the vav, it can mean and, as it does here in the second sentence, and you shall love this woman, or you can leave it out. This really is a preference on your part. The most important thing is to recognize that when it is attached to these perfect verbs, that you flip its meaning from past tense to future. Okay, let's look at just a couple different more. Actually, let's look now at the imperfect verb plus the reversing vav, and then we'll look at these two. We've looked at the perfect, we'll look at the imperfect, and then we'll do some practice sentences. So here we go. Now we're looking at imperfect verb plus reversing vav. So what do you think is going to happen here? Well, imperfect we normally translate as incomplete action, or often in the future tense in English. So it's going to flip that and turn it into the past tense. So let's look at the first sentence. Yishmeru b'nei Yisrael et haTorah. So this is similar to the sentence we just read above. The Israelites will guard et haTorah. They will keep, that is, the Israelites will keep, or the children of Israel will keep the Torah. Now, what do we do when we throw a reversing vav on it? Vayishmeru, here it is, that's the word, this is the second sentence. Vayishmeru b'nei Yisrael et haTorah. Now, this is imperfect. This is imperfect plus reversing vav. So normally what you'll see is the vav, patach, and a dagesh in the yod, or whatever the prefix letter happens to be, the prefix consonant happens to be. So the vav, the patach, and the yod, vayishmeru b'nei Yisrael et haTorah. The Israelites, the children of Israel, guarded or kept the Torah. Again, the vav reverses the function of the imperfect, and in this case is going to turn it into the past tense. Let's look at the next one. Tizkor et bincha. Tizkor et bincha. What do you think about this first verb? What do you recognize here? Well, zakar, the root zayin kaf resh, has to do with remembering something, right? So this is either, the tizkor is ambiguous. It could be either second masculine singular pa'al imperfect, or third feminine singular pa'al imperfect. Let's go with second masculine singular. You will remember your son, bincha. So that we have the pronominal possessive suffix, which we learned in the last couple chapters, attached to ben, your son, in this case bincha. Okay, so in the imperfect we would say you will remember your son. What happens when you put that reversing vav? And here you see the vav, the patach, and the dagesh. That little triad is present here, indicating that you're looking at the reversing vav. And so you remembered your son, and you remembered your son. So again, it flips and reverses the function, the typical function of the imperfect. Last sentence. Yishpot hakohen et ammo. Yishpot hakohen et ammo. The priest, hakohen, right? There's a definite article. Yishpot will judge. Shafat, remember we've just recently learned this root has to do with the act of judging or even delivering, as in the book of Judges. The priest will judge his people, et ammo. And the O here, again, this is the third masculine singular pronominal suffix, possessive suffix, so referring to his people. Attached to the word which means people. So the priest will judge his people. What happens if we throw that reversing vav on? Vayishpot hakohen et ammo. The priest will the priest judged his people. Vayishpot hakohen et ammo. The priest judged his people. Again, you see the vav, patach, yod with the dagesh. Let's do some practice. Vayomer Moshe el bnei Yisrael ba'et hahi ze har hakodesh. Vayomer Moshe el bnei Yisrael ba'et hahi ze har hakodesh. Okay, that's a long sentence, and there's a lot in there, but let's begin with what we know. We'll probably recognize Moshe, the name of Moses, right? And the word el, this is our preposition. Bnei Yisrael, the children of Israel. Ba'et hahi, this is our a preposition with et hahi, and so this is the demonstrative pronoun. The entire phrase meaning in that time. Zeh, this is the demonstrative. Har HaKodesh. Now that's a new word, Kodesh, but this is a construct phrase. Har HaKodesh, the mountain of holiness. So let's put all this together. Now the important part, of course, is the Vayomer, right? This is our verb that we're going to focus on, because it is an imperfect verb. Obviously, it has all the features of an imperfect verb, namely it has the prefix, right? So this looks like a third masculine singular, pa'al, imperfect, but it has something in addition to that. It also has this vav, patach, and dagesh in the yod. So this is our reversing vav. So we would normally translate this, if we kind of bracket out the vav for a moment. Moshe will say to the Israelites in that time, this is the holy mountain. Now what happens when we put the reversing vav on it? Moses said to the Israelites at that time, this is the holy mountain. So again, all that vav does is imagine what it would normally be in the imperfect and then flip it with respect to its aspect or its tense. Moshe said as opposed to will say, and so the reversing vav flips that. That's an incredibly important, I put that sentence first because Vayomer is an incredibly important verb to recognize, especially in narrative, right? When you have people speaking to one another. This is an extremely common verbal form to come across. Probably, maybe not quite as common, but definitely around the same level as the next verb in the next sentence, vayhi. Okay, so let's look at that. Vayhi ha'ish zaken acharei meyashana. A couple different new words in there. You may recognize this, the verb that we're going to focus on, as being from haya, and without the yod here, or without the vav there, we would recognize it as the third masculine singular, pa'al, imperfect, and then we have ha'ish, okay, ha'ish zaken, and then acharei meyashana. This is a new word for you. Actually, this entire phrase is somewhat new to you. 100 years. 100 years. So how would you put this all together? It's important to focus here on the Vayhi. This is a very common narrative form, and it's often how sentences and stories will begin. Vayhi. Normally, if it were imperfect, we would say, and it will be, or something like that. And it will come to pass, if we wanted to project that into the future. When the Vav is on there, though, and it happened, or and it came to pass, that the man was old after 100 years. Vayhi ha'ish zaken achare mea shana. And it came to pass. So that whole phrase, and it came to pass, or and it happened, or and it was. Again, this is a very common form to run into in Hebrew narrative. Vayhi. It's very important that you recognize this form. And of course, for the sake of English, I had to add the word that. There is no that here in this sentence. Okay. Let's go to the next one. V'ra'u hakohanim et mizbach kadsho. V'ra'u hakohanim et mizbach kadsho. Okay, so what are some of the things you recognize here? You probably recognize hakohanim, the priests, right? This is the masculine plural absolute form of the priests. You may recognize et as the untranslatable direct object marker. Mizbach, this is the construct or word pair form of mizbeach, which refers to altar, refers to an altar. So we actually have a word pair phrase at the very end, mizbach kadsho, really the altar, his holy altar. If we wanted to do it in very wooden form, the altar of his holiness, but you can't translate it that way in English. It is his holy altar, because the third masculine singular pronoun at the end, which is where we get the his, refers to the entire phrase, not just his holiness. It refers to mizbach as well. So that's why I say his holy altar. So who's doing the acting? Who's the subject? Hakohanim, yes. And here we have ra'u, a third common plural perfect verb, but then we see that it has a reversing vav on it. So we have to translate, this is from ra'ah, right? The verb for seeing, that has to do with sight and seeing. The priests will see his holy altar. The priests will see his holy altar. Okay, let's do some practice with some sentences that are incorrect. So I want to show you both the Hebrew and then the English, and I want you to think a little bit we'll think aloud together about what is wrong with these translations, because there are some things that are wrong with them. Okay, let's begin with the first one. Ve'ana hu et malach hamelech bidvarim rabim. Okay. And then here's the translation that I've given. And he answered the messenger of the king with many words. There is something very wrong with that sentence. Can you pick out what it is? I'll give you a second just to look through it. Well, given the topic of today's lesson, you would rightly look to the verb. There's only one in this sentence, ve'ana. And how did I translate that? What is the incorrect translation? And he answered. Why is that wrong? Well, because this translation doesn't reflect the effects of the reversing vav. So what it should say is, and he will answer the messenger of the king with many words. Now you might be confused by why I translated the bait with. This is yet another example of how these prepositions are quite flexible. The bait that I'm using to translate here is often called the bait of means, and it describes the means by which somebody completes an action, and in this case the action is ve'ana. He answered malach hamelech. He answered the messenger of the king. How? By means of many words. So this is some kind of loquacious messenger. But answered with or by means of many words. Let's look at the second sentence and see if we can figure out what's wrong there. Vana'amod im malkeinu vana'avor et gevulenu. Okay, lots of news in noons in that sentence, which should give you a little bit of a hint of the person. Should give you a hint about the person of the verbs and also what those pronouns are all about. Let's look at the translation that's given, the incorrect translation. We will stand with our king, and we crossed over our border. What's wrong here? Well, as you might guess, we should look at the verbs first. Here's the first verb. We have our reversing vav, and on an imperfect verb, right? The prefix here, well, let's start with the root, right? Amad. This is a root that we know very well, that we've had for a long time. It has to do with standing. And when we have that nun on the front as a prefix, we know that that has to do with us, or we are doing something. But with that reversing vav, it really should not say we will stand, as this translation says, but rather we stood with. Im is the preposition with. Malkeinu, this is our king, so we have the nu as the possessive preposition and then attached to melech, which changes to Malkeinu. We stood with our king, and we crossed over our border. So actually the second verb is translated correctly. Vana'avor et gevulenu, and gevulenu being the gevul, which is the word for border or boundary, and it has the word nu, the pronoun nu, the possessive pronoun nu attached, our border. Okay, but actually before we jump into the participle, I just want to say, and I'll repeat this again at the end. I know this is a little bit crazy we've spent such a long time learning about how the imperfect and the perfect work, and now Hebrew throws us this little curveball in which we now have to reverse, really quite turn all of our learning on its head, and it's a little bit confusing, but just practice as many sentences as you can from the practice book. Make sure you're always checking your work, and this will just become normal and natural once you do enough practice sentences. So that brings us to the end of our first big focus for today. Let's look at the second one, the participle. And we're going to learn both active and passive forms of the pa'al participle. Let me give you a definition first. This is from your book. In Hebrew, a participle is a form of the verb that can be used as an adjective, a noun, or a verb. One of those three. We're going to look at all three forms. Second point that I want to make is that participles have only gender and number. Okay, so gender, masculine, feminine, number, singular or plural. They don't have person. Okay, so even though it is a form of the verb, if you were to parse it, you wouldn't have to say first, second, or third. That doesn't exist for the participle. That's called, in technical terms, that's called person. And the participle just doesn't have person. So in this lesson, and this is redundant. In this lesson, we'll learn the two forms, active and passive. Let's begin with the active participle. And let's just start with this question. How do I recognize the active participle? Let's grab onto something we recognize, shamar, so we can feel a little bit of safety and a little bit of security before we jump into these deep waters. Which hopefully will not be up to the neck. So guard. Let's look at guard. How would you recognize a participial form of the active participial form of shamar? Here is the key. One key thing that you need to look for. And actually, the best way to see this is not to look at these examples quite yet, but to look at the kind of more schematic form, which uses X's. Those X's stand for the letters of the root. Here's the key. Sometimes the vowels underneath the second and third radical are going to change. What is going to be there is the holum, or the holum vav. Sometimes it will be there written plane, that is written in its full form. Sometimes it will be written defectively, or to say not its whole form. But what the key to look for is this holum between the first and the second radical. Right there. Or in full form, right there. This is, of course, much easier to recognize. Now, so when you look over here, you'll see each of those, you'll see the different forms, the masculine singular, masculine plural forms. And notice in all of them, they have this holum. Again, sometimes the vowels beneath the second and third change. The endings, however, take note of the endings. These are basically the endings that you know from the nouns, right? Shomeret, that is the feminine singular, is a little bit different. But the im on the end of shomrim and shomrot, those are the plural endings for nouns and for adjectives. Those are going to be easy to recognize. You'll have to pay a little bit more attention to the feminine singular. But again, the key to note here is look, if you think you're looking at a participle, look for that holum vav, or the holum beneath the first and the second, between the first and second radicals. That's the key to recognizing these. Now, as noted above, there are three functions. The participle can function as an adjective, noun, or a verb. So let's look at some examples of that. Let's begin with the active participle as a verb. Point number one, the participle, when it functions as a verb, can express the present continuous, an action in progress, imminent action, or action that continues over time. So it's very flexible in terms of its meaning. I will give a couple different meanings in each case, but that certainly does not exhaust the meanings that one can attribute to the participle, the active participle. And then secondly, the participle, I'm here on this point, must agree with the subject, that is the one doing the acting, the subject of the participle in terms of gender and number. Okay, by looking at gender and number, we can also it will also help us determine the subject of the verb. Let's look at the first sentence. Hatzadik yoshev b'machaneh. Okay, a couple new words here. You will probably recognize, actually the first and the third word are both new. You will probably recognize the third one though, or the middle one, I'm sorry. Yoshev. Okay, you recognize the root as yashav, which means to sit or dwell or reside, all of those things. So we know that somebody is going to be sitting, dwelling, or residing. It's yoshev, no endings. So based on what you know from this past chart, what is it going to be? MS, FS, MP, FP. Well, no endings, right? So it has to be MS, masculine singular. Now, what about hatzadik? Hatzadik, what about that? Well, that is refers to the righteous ones. Hatzadik, it's an adjective that is substantivized or turned into a noun. And then b'machaneh is the bait with the definite article, right? Patach. And then machaneh is the word for camp or encampment. So this means the righteous one, hatzadik, lives or is living, just, a couple examples, in the camp. The key here to notice, though, is yoshev. This is a masculine singular, all active participle from yashav, from the root yashav. Let's look at the second sentence. Hu yored im hamishpacha mitzrayma. Hu yored im hamishpacha mitzrayma. Okay, what do you notice? Well, the who is a pronoun, right? An independent pronoun referring to he. And so this person is going to do something. Where is the participle in this sentence? Can you pick it out? Remember, the key is to look for the holum vav, or just simply the holum, the O between the first and the second radical. Do you recognize it? If you looked at yored, you are correct. Now the subject of this verb is he. He, and do you remember yarad? This refers to going down or descending. So he is descending. Im hamishpacha, do you remember hamishpacha? This is the word for family, and this is of course the word for Egypt. Mitzrayma. He is descending with the family, or he goes down or is going down with the family toward Egypt. That's our directional hey at the end of Mitzrayim, right? Yeah, so this is again a masculine singular, all active participle with the subject who. Let's look at the last one. Moshe, okay, our guy Moses, shomea et kolo. Moshe shomea et kolo. So again, don't remember the vowels under the second and third can change, and this occurs when you have this furtive patach beneath tied in with the tseire, and this happens with often with nouns that end with a chet or an ayin. So we have Moshe shomea et kolo. Moses, and what is Moses doing? Moses is the subject of what verb? Where's your participle? Well, you might initially make the mistake of thinking that it is kolo, because you do actually have the holam vav, but remember that kol is is its own word. It is the word for voice or sound. And then it has, kol has the third masculine singular suffix on it, referring to his voice. So the only other option here is shomea, and this is from shama, the word for hear. And so Moses hears what? His voice. Maybe he hears the voice of God. Moses hears or is hearing, as just one alternative translation. Moses hears or is hearing his voice. Moshe shomea et kolo. Let's look at active participles as adjectives. So the last one we were looking at was those are examples of participles as verbs. So the participle can also function adjectively to describe the noun. When a participle functions in this way, it follows the rules associated with adjectives. That is, it will agree with the noun it modifies in terms of gender, number, and definiteness. So just as a reminder, ha'ish hatov, this means what? You have the definite article on both, so it is a descriptive adjective, an attributive adjective, the good man. Ha'ish hatov. Now, the participle is going to follow those same rules. Look at the sentence. Ha'ish hayoshev. And they actually are kind enough to give us both examples. Remember, this is just a reminder. Notice how you have hayoshev. Notice that the holam has actually disappeared. This is a sheen. This is the letter sheen. And remember that oftentimes when you just have the O vowel, the holam, next to a sheen, they will be collapsed. The dots will be collapsed into one another. So just keep your eyes out for that there is a holam here between the yod and the sheen, as there is here, but because the vav is not there to mark it, it is collapsed into the dot over the sheen. Okay, so what does this mean? Ha'ish hayoshev, the sitting man. Or you could say the man who is sitting, but the sitting man. And so here we have the participle functioning as an adjective, attributing this quality of sitting to ha'ish, the man. Let's look at another one. Here again, imo hatova. This is just showing us how the adjective functions, the attributive adjective, and as an analogy with the active participle as adjective. So imo hatova. These two, the adjective and the noun, agree with one another in terms of definiteness, right? Imo is definite because it has the possessive pronoun on it. O, his good mother. So hatova is definite again because imo is also definite. Attributive adjective, his good mother. Now, how would you, on analogy, what would an active participle as an adjective look like with imo? Imo hayoshevet. Imo hayoshevet. So here again, they're both definite, right? O, the possessive pronoun, tells us it's definite, and then hayoshevet, functioning with the rules of the attributive adjective, it is also definite, and so his sitting mother, his or his mother who is sitting. That's the active participle as an adjective. What about the active participle as a noun? This is the third and final function of the active participle. So they can also function as nouns. When it functions this way, it can be made definite. It can have the hey, the definite article, and can also be part of a word pair or a construct chain. So that's going to be a little bit interesting, especially when we come to the plural forms of the participle. So let's look at the first one. This is singular, simple, nothing too scary here. Oseh shalom. What does the word asa mean? Do you remember that? Asa? This refers to doing or making. So if you wanted to turn a participle into a noun, it would be one who makes peace. Shalom, of course, peace. Or peacemaker, right? If you want to make reference to or echo the Sermon on the Mount. Oseh shalom, one who makes peace. So do you see the difference here? That oseh is used here actually to describe a noun. It's not qualifying another noun or attributing some kind of state to another noun or even an action to another noun. There is no subject here. The noun itself, the participle itself has become a noun, peace, a peacemaker, or one who makes peace. Now, I also mentioned above that these participles made into nouns can also be part of word pairs. So let's look at how that happens down below. Oseh shalom. What's happening here? You may notice the tzere yod at the end, that this looks a lot like the masculine plural word pair form of a noun, and you would be absolutely right. The plural forms of the participle, when they are in a word pair, when they're in the construct state, they take on the same form as the plural, as if they were plural nouns. And that's in fact how they are functioning. So we have makers or doers of peace. So kind of very, very similar in terms of what these two sentences are saying, but they're doing it in a very different way. And the second one is plural. That's why it's makers as opposed to maker of peace. Oseh shalom. Oseh shalom, makers of peace. So that's active participle as a noun. Let's do a little bit of practice. Hamelech shofet et amo. Hamelech shofet et amo. Okay, well, we have first Hamelech, right? And shofet. Shofet is going to be our participle. Now, you might want to ask yourself from the very beginning, is this going to be a nominal participle? That is, the participle functioning as a noun? Is it functioning as an adjective? Is it functioning as a verb with a subject? Well, in this case, let's begin. The one that we might jump to is, this is an adjective. It's right after the noun, just like an attributive participle would be, an adjectival participle would be. There's only one problem with that. Hamelech is definite and shofet is not. So this is the active participle functioning as a verb. See if you can translate it. The king is judging et amo, his people. So here, and you could also say it continues judging his people. There are a number of different ways you could flex that translation, but for now we'll just leave it at this. The king is judging his people. Let's look at the second sentence. It's going to be slightly different, but have some similarities. Hamelech hashofet yashav ba'aretz. So we have Hamelech again, but notice the participle is the second word again, but this time it is definite, matching the definiteness of the noun that it is qualifying. So here we're probably going to have an example of a participle functioning adjectivally, that is to attribute excuse me, the action of shofet, of judging, to Hamelech. And what is this king doing? Yashav ba'aretz, he lived in the land. So how would we put all this together? The judging king, or the king who judges, lived, yashav ba'aretz, the bait plus the definite article on eretz. So the judging king lived in the land. Let's look at the third sentence. Hashofet yashav ba'aretz. What do you think? Is this an adjective? A participle functioning as an adjective, shofet? Is it a verb with a subject? Or is it a noun? I'll give you a moment just to think about which of those three you think this sentence might reflect. Participle again being shofet. Well, if you guessed that this is a noun, that this participle is a noun, then you are correct. The judge lived in the land, or the one who judges. You could do it in that way as well. And so the definite article is attached to shofet, and there is no other subject that it could, as there is up here, Hamelech, whoops, where's my cursor? There is no subject to which that could be acting in this way. This is itself a self-standing noun. The judge, or the one who judges, lived in the land. Let's look at the last sentence. Shoftei Yisrael yashvu ba'aretz. Look at it for a moment and see if you can figure out what's going on here. Well, the participle is quite obvious, shoftei, right? From shafat, again, we're just continuing to work with that root. And we see the holam vav there between the sheen and the pei. And there's something else you might notice here, the tzerei yod. Remember that just as this is we know this typically as the construct ending for the masculine plural noun, right? But that rule, same idea, applies to the masculine plural participles. So we might translate this sentence as the judges of Israel lived or dwelled ba'aretz, in the land. And this is, of course, third common plural to match the subject of that verb, which is shoftei Yisrael. So this is masculine plural construct. It is definite because Yisrael, as a personal noun, or as a proper noun, I should say, a land name, or the name of the name of the people, is inherently definite. So that's why it is the judges of Israel lived in the land. Let's go now to the passive participle. Three things about the passive participle. First, the passive participle, it simply describes a person or thing that is acted upon. So the active form of active would be something like this. An active sentence would be this: the king is judging. Passive is the king is judged. So the subject of the participle is actually acted upon. It becomes the passive recipient of some kind of action. How do I recognize the passive participle? Good question. The key here is also going to have to do with vav in some cases, but it's going to have to do with the shurek, the oo sound, which in the pa'al is typically, the pa'al participle will come between the second and third radicals. So the key here is not between the signal that you need to look for is not between the first and second, as it is in the active, but rather between the second and third. It is the oo sound. So, for instance, we have katuv, a thing is written. So that's the masculine singular, and then so on and so forth. Again, the endings are more or less identical to the endings that you know from nouns. And so, but again, the key to recognizing the passive participle is this oo, the oo sound, the shurek, between the second and third radicals. So let's look again at the passive participle as a verb. Again, the passive participle can function just like the active one can, as a verb, as a noun, and as an adjective. So here we have them, a couple examples of them functioning as verbs. Hamalach, shaluach. So malach is a relatively new word, and this refers to the messenger, or in this case, the messenger, because it has ha on the front of it. Try not to confuse this with melech. I know some of the radicals are the same. The way you tell the difference is the aleph here, malach. So, as a passive verb, the messenger is sent. The messenger is sent. Shaluach. Here we see the shurek here between the lamed and the chet, and the patach there, which we often see with verbs like noach or ruach that end with a chet and that have a shurek in between. So the messenger is sent. Hamalach shaluach. The messenger is sent. Let's look at the second word. Hadavar katuv. So here again, the word is written. Is written. Katuv. So it wouldn't be the word writes. That would, first of all, be a weird sentence, but just technically it's not the word writes, but it is written. Something is happening to the subject of this participle. In this case, hadavar, or above hamalach. Let's look at the passive participle as an adjective. Here we're going to use some of the similar words, malach, shaluach, a messenger who is sent, or we could say a sent messenger. And again, as with the active participles, when the passive participle is functioning as an adjective, it will agree with the noun that it's modifying in terms of gender, number, and definiteness. And that's why in the second word, hadavar, hakatuv, both of them have the definite article, and they are both a masculine singular. So the adjectival participle agrees with its nominal partner hadavar in terms of gender, it's masculine. In terms of number, it's singular, and also in terms of definiteness, that is, it has the definite article he on the front. Hadavar hakatuv. The written word is how you would translate that, or the word that is written. Now, what about passive participles as nouns? You can certainly do that. Hashaluach, the one who is sent, or the sent one. The one who is sent. And so this, again, this can have the definite article on it because it's functioning as a noun. And then hakatuv, the written one, or the one which is written. So just as the active participle can function as a noun, so the passive participle can also function as an independent noun. Let's do some practice. And now this practice is going to throw a tiny little a curveball at you, so I'm going to let you look at it and see if you can figure it out. Hamayim, that's easy, the waters, right? Netunim laboneh. I'm going to let you sit with that sentence for just a moment and see what you come up with. Okay, what did you come up with? I would be, if we were actually having a live interaction, I would be interested to see, because there are some tricky things in this sentence. Okay, hamayim is clear. We don't need to really worry about that. This means the waters. Netunim. What is this word? Well, it comes from Natan, right? We recognize Natan, which has to do with giving or gifting. But instead, and it also has the Hirek Yod and the Mem, so it has some kind of masculine plural ending on it. But what is this kibbutz doing? What is this? These three dots, which we know also mean u. Well, the last chart that I showed you didn't actually mention this, but it probably should have. The passive participle can be marked both by the shurek here between the second or third, or if they don't have the vav written, they can also use the kibbutz, which is the three dots. Both, of course, make the sound u, netunim. And here we have it between the second and third. So this is hamayim was given. The water, or is given, we should say. The water is given, and to whom it is given? Laboneh. Here's actually another participle. Did you recognize it? Beit nun hey. This has to do with building, right? So to the builder. The water is given. It probably is given is probably, that's going to be a better translation here. The water is given to the builder, or the one who builds, is how you could also say that. To the builder. So the last participle, laboneh, is actually a participle, an active participle, functioning as a noun. Now this sentence is very nice because it allows us to compare and contrast the passive participle here, netunim, with its u sound between the second and third radical, and the active participle here, boneh, which has its the holum between the first and the second radical. So this is a helpful sentence on that level. The water is given to the builder, or to the one who builds. Second sentence, Ma'aseh Aharon ketuvim haTorah. Ma'aseh Aharon ketuvim baTorah. Ma'aseh. This is a relatively new word for you. This is the plural construct. Deeds is deeds of, in fact. And Aharon is is the personal noun for Aaron. Oh no, it looks like I gave you the answer too early. Too late. The deeds of Aaron are written from katav, right? So here we have, again, the kibbutz between the second and third radicals, ketuvim, are written, the deeds of Aaron are written batorah, in the Torah. And so the ketuvim actually applies to the entire word pair here, Ma'aseh Aharon, the deeds of Aaron, and it's plural, of course, because Ma'aseh is the plural form. Okay, let's look at the third sentence, and this time I won't give you the answer too quickly. Hakli natun laboneh. So we recognize some of these words, right? Kli is the word for vessel, excuse me, and it has, of course, the definite article attached to it. So we have the vessel, kli, and what happens to this vessel? Natun laboneh. It is given from Natan, right? And we see here this sentence actually really contrasts well the active participle, which again we have the same active participle of here, laboneh, the builder. Something is being given to the builder, and then here we have in this participle, the passive participle, the shurek between the second and third radicals, laboneh. So the vessel is given to the builder, laboneh, to the one who builds or to the builder. Okay, there's a lot, as always, there is a lot in this lecture and in these two chapters. And so let me conclude with a couple of study tips. And as always, we'll be going through many, many examples this week. And I trust that you'll have many, many other opportunities apart from just our practice times in this lecture to do some more studying. So here are some tips for you while you are doing that studying. First, read as many sentences in chapter 17, let's just say chapter 17 through 18 as you can. Check your translations with the study guide. The reversing vav is key here. I cannot tell you how important it is for you to really get this down, and to practice with it a lot. You cannot get past the third verse of Genesis 1 without encountering this phenomenon. That's how important it is. And you're going to see it many other times in the book of Genesis and beyond. It's so important for Hebrew narrative in particular, but just for Hebrew in general. You need to know how to translate and to recognize the reversing vav. So do as many sentences as you can, especially in chapter 17, which focuses on the reversing vav. Notice the similarities, now I'm moving on to participles. Notice the similarity between the noun endings and the participle endings. Use that to your advantage. You don't need to memorize these endings all over again as if you had never seen them before. Just recognize that the participles generally use the endings of the noun. You're going to run into some funny stuff with the feminine singular active participle, but apart from that tiny little exception, which you should be able to recognize easily because it ends with a tav, which is often a feminine ending, they're virtually identical. And so use that prior knowledge you have of noun endings to help you learn the participial endings. Thirdly, create your own Hebrew sentences or translate sentences from English to Hebrew. We are now at the point that you know how to say some things in multiple different ways. So what I encourage you to do, and I'm thinking in particular of the reversing vav, what I encourage you to do is look maybe at page 188, exercise 4, which gives you a number of Hebrew or English sentences. Try to translate those English sentences into Hebrew in as many ways as you know how. And in most cases, this will involve, maybe they'll give you a past tense sentence. Write it out with perfect verbs, and then try to write it out with imperfect verbs plus the reversing vav. If you can do that, you're going to be in great shape, and it will demonstrate that you really know what this reversing vav is all about. Or in the case of participles as well, what these participles are all about. So create your own sentences and write these in as many ways as you can. Fourthly, I want to remind you just to continue drilling old vocab words in preparation for the upcoming exams, the final exams, that is to say the final 2 exams. Make sure that you are drilling those old words. Well, this brings us to the conclusion of our video. Again, as a reminder, what we covered here was the reversing vav and the participle, active and passive. If you have any questions this week, you know how to get in touch with me, and I look forward to talking with you in our video conferences. Thanks.